It's Thursday on Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a good one out there and a good show coming up here today. Marcus Fuller from the Star Tribune joins me here in just a few minutes to talk Gopher men's basketball. They play at Michigan tonight. Opportunity to kind of jumpstart their conference season. They're 1-1 in conference play. They had those two games against Ohio State and Nebraska about a month ago or so, but now we get into the bulk of Big Ten play. The Gophers have had a fairly successful non-conference year. I don't think they have a signature win yet, which I'll talk with Marcus about. Beaten up on a lot of teams that are less than they are. Their non-conference schedule, I believe, their non-conference strength of schedule is last in all of college basketball. So we have to take their 10-3 record and put it in that kind of perspective. But you also have to like what you've seen from some of what they've done so far this year. So an opportunity right now at Michigan. Then they come home a few days later to play Maryland. Some opportunities here early against teams that are, competitive, but probably not the upper echelon of the Big Ten right now. And what does that mean for the potential for this season? Marcus and I will get into a lot of that here in just a little bit. Got an interesting Justin Jefferson quote to play from Wednesday's media session out in Eagan. I was out there just to record a new Access Vikings podcast. We got into the Jefferson stuff some on that show as well, but I want to play the quote for you and let you kind of parse what you maybe think he's getting at, and as it pertains to the quarterback situation with the Vikings going forward. Minnesota's franchise in the PWHL played its first game, won at Boston last night. We'll get into that a little bit later. Some Gopher women's basketball stuff at the end of the show as well. First, though, what did I miss? Let's start with the Timberwolves. Here's an interesting thing right now, you guys. This is a franchise that has played, this is their 35th year, I believe, 35 years of Timberwolves basketball. A lot of it not so great. Went back and looked, 11 of those 35 seasons, the Timberwolves won 23 games or fewer in an entire season. About 1/3 of their seasons in history, they've won 24 or fewer games in those seasons. 24 or fewer games. Now there's an asterisk in that a couple of those years were COVID years, so the seasons were a little shorter. They were 19-45 one year. They were 23-49 one year, so not quite a full season. But point being, about a third of the years, 11 or 12 of those years, they won 24 games or fewer. Right now, they have 24 wins through 33 games of the season. They're 24-9 after losing last night to New Orleans. Not looking great doing it. New Orleans took it to them, beat them pretty easily at Target Center. Kind of had that energy from the beginning, like, this is not going to be easy at the very least, and they're in trouble in this game. It's their first 2-game losing streak of the entire season. They just lost to the Knicks a couple days ago, and now losing to the Pelicans. 24-9. 7-5 now during this stretch of games that was going to test them against better opponents. 16 in a row they had, 11 of them on the road against teams with winning records. That is a gauntlet. That is a tough stretch. 7-5 during that stretch. Feels good. Now, they've caught some teams at good times during there. They've had some games where, their opponent didn't have their full strength, but 7-5 is 7-5. So you look at it as a whole and you say, okay, you couldn't have scripted this season much better still from where you thought it could go. But right now, in this moment, I feel like they are kind of buckling a little bit and feeling, at the very least, the burden of expectation, which has not been placed upon this franchise very much in the course of their history when they're losing way more than they're winning, when they're having seasons, a third of their seasons, like I said, that didn't even end up with as many wins as they have right now, not even at the halfway point of this season, not even close really to the halfway point of the season. You got almost 10 games left before the halfway point of this season. They've already got 24 wins. They're feeling the burden of expectation right now. They're feeling what it's like to raise expectations when people say, okay, this is a team I believe in, when you even have a little dip. Now, I think they haven't been playing all that well for the past, handful of games, and I want to I'm going to read a Chris Finch quote here in just a second that kind of gets to that. I don't think they've been playing all that great lately, but they've still been winning a lot of these games. Now they've got this 2-game losing streak, their first 2-game losing streak of the entire season. And there's a lot of sky is falling on social media, and that's to be expected. I asked last night, I didn't watch all of last night's game. I only saw maybe a quarter and a half of it. And I asked, basically, is this just a blip or is something broken right now with this team? And I got a lot of people saying a little bit of both. Some people saying the sky is falling. Chris Finch can't coach, which I don't believe. Chris Finch is a good coach. The offense looks stagnant. I do believe that. So people can identify what doesn't look right with this team, but that's a little bit different, I think, than this team is not any good anymore. Chris Finch, head coach, said last night, there's going to be a lot of waves and adversity. There's adversity in this game. There's adversity in the season. This is just another one, and we've got to fix it. We haven't played with a lot of pop and purpose since Sacramento. We haven't been very sharp. I'm glad he's acknowledging that. I think that's a good way to put it. That Sacramento game was 6 games ago. They won that game against one of the better teams in the Western Conference and in the NBA this year. Since then, you're right. He's right, and other people are right. They haven't looked as good. They haven't looked as crisp. The ball movement hasn't been as good. The defense has been a little bit under siege a little bit more, teams figuring them out a little bit more. New Orleans certainly did. Zion Williamson, a very good game last night. They're starting to get figured out a little bit, but you also have to look at this and say, man, it's an 82-game season. You're not going to be sharp for 82 games. If you happen to string a bunch of those games, or at least like more often than not, if you don't play your best for a handful of games, people are going to notice. That doesn't necessarily mean that this is going the wrong direction. I'm a little concerned right now. I don't like what I've seen in a lot of these games lately. I think that it's also telling that they're basically at full strength or as close to full strength as they've been this season right now, and still some of this is happening. I think Ant has been a little bit selfish with the ball, trying to do a little bit too much lately. The ball is getting, like they like to say, sticky on offense, and it's just not flowing. It's stopping when it gets to Ant. When it gets to Towns, those guys looking to get theirs. Gobert only had like 4 shot attempts last night. That shouldn't happen. He's not a great shooter, but he should be involved in the offense. They should be getting him those easy looks. So some things for them to clean up. I'm not anywhere close to panic mode. They've built up enough of that equity so far this season with how they've played. I think we can treat this as a lull at this point until further evidence presents itself. But I'm a little concerned. I'm just a little concerned right now. Not as much as some of you, but I'm a little concerned, watching to see where this goes, seeing if it's a lull or something more than that. And the good news for them, I guess, is that after the next 4 games, they got to get through this next 4 games, and the schedule eases off considerably. They can start kind of feeling good about themselves, kind of have some of those nights where they don't necessarily have to be at their best, or if they are at their best, they're going to blow teams out, be able to rest guys a little bit, things like that. I think they need a little bit of that release valve, and they haven't had it lately. It's coming pretty soon. They just got to get through the rest of this, find their game again, and start playing the way they were playing at the beginning of the year when they were building up all of this goodwill that people are now worried about.
Grand Casino would like to take a moment and salute the true football fan. The passion, the hope, the anticipation, that incomparable feeling of winning. Grand Casino would also like to take a moment to remind you that you can find all that anticipation, thrill, and winning at Grand Casino. Grand Casino. Let your story begin.
Let's talk Gopher men's basketball today with Marcus Fuller from the Star Tribune. He joins me ahead of Thursday night's Gopher game at Michigan. It's not the Big Ten opener. They started doing this weird thing, Marcus. I still can't get my arms around it, where they play a couple early December games in the Big Ten. But this always, once you get past the new year, it feels like this is really the official start of the conference season. They're 1-1 in Big Ten play at Michigan. A lot to like about what they did during the non-conference season, but also I think still question marks, right? Because they didn't play a very daunting schedule. They don't have a signature win, I would say, yet, at least, unless we count that Nebraska game, which I don't think I do yet. But a chance to prove themselves here against Michigan, and a chance to kind of see where they stand after, feeling good about themselves for a lot of how they've played in the non-conference.
Yeah, happy New Year to you. Thanks for having me on the podcast for the first time in 2024. I
Yes.
appreciate it, and
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
it's on a positive note right now. So
It is
we're
rare.
off to a
That's
good start.
rare. That's rare for this
Yeah.
podcast with you on. Unfortunately, because this podcast is only about 3 years old, and there's not been,
Yep.
Marcus, a lot of good news for Gopher
I
basketball in
would
that
say
span.
2023 was mostly frustrating for Gopher
Yes.
basketball fans and on this podcast listening. But
Yes.
2024 has a lot of optimism. I mean, you're a harsh critic and you're saying you're not counting Nebraska, which is that's pretty
That's
that's
it's not
the best
it's
win
not
they.
it's a good win. It's not a signature win. Nebraska is not a signature win.
No, no,
It's a
you're
good
right.
win though. It's a good win.
It's a good, yeah. It's not, if you have the net rankings, which the NCAA committee uses to judge or evaluate the tournament. It's not a quad one win, which is the
Yeah.
best win that you could get. At the time, Nebraska was 7-1, and their only loss was to Creighton. They were pretty hot. I would still consider Nebraska a much improved team this year
Sure.
and one capable of. I mean, they beat Michigan State already,
Okay.
and they also beat Kansas State. So I like them to make a jump similar to where you're seeing the Gophers and maybe not being that last place team in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
So it was a win that they needed to have because
Yes.
at that point, you had lost to Ohio State and San Francisco and
Mhm.
Missouri, which were the three worst teams. I'm sorry, the three best teams that they had played to that point, they had lost. So, ever since those three losses, they've gone five straight wins going into the rest of conference play. You had mentioned that this team, in those wins, maybe against lesser opponents, had looked very, very good. That's kind of what they're doing this year. I wrote that in my four things that you mentioned as the last thing that I have online right now about them handling their business this year. I mean, they last year their average margin of victory playing those non-power five teams in non-conference play was, I believe, 9 points a game.
Yep.
This year, 22 points a game margin of victory against those lesser teams. Obviously, they lost to San Francisco on the road, but those opponents that they played at home from non-power conferences, they've beaten pretty handily. And some of those teams were not necessarily favored to win their conferences, but they were decent teams. And in this day and age in college basketball, with the transfer portal and COVID years, you have teams with fifth, sixth year seniors, very experienced players, and they've had some upsets this year in the Big Ten. Michigan just lost to McNeese State.
Yep.
And they lost to Long Beach State earlier in the year at home. So, you can't take for granted winning those games, and they look well doing it, and then they've won them convincingly.
Yeah, and you can't take anything away from them. They're 10-3 right now, and you only can play what you've set out to play on your schedule. I think you're right. The margin of victory is important in this case because it does show you that they're putting teams away, and they just have more depth, right? I mean, they've had a few little injuries. I mean, the most significant one being Dawson Garcia out for a few games. Seems like they're pretty much full strength, or at least as close to it as they could be for this Michigan game. And you don't win games by 20 plus points without having, a bunch of different people who can score on a given night. And I think that's what they've probably lacked in recent years. They could have one or two guys who are capable of going off, but if they had bad nights, they were going to lose by a lot. So you look at guys like Elijah Hawkins, look at guys like Mike Mitchell. Those guys, coming in and making immediate contributions, not just, scoring, but playmaking. And defensively, it seems like they've found a rhythm. So a lot to like. How do you see their identity emerging at this point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think, part of what they did well when Garcia was out was that they relied more on their backcourt than they had before. You still had a presence like Pharrell Payne. Joshua Joseph led them in scoring for a couple games without Garcia. But for the most part, especially recently, I mean, you've seen this backcourt take a really big step forward. Hawkins broke the assist record. I don't know if we talked about it the last time I was on this
We did,
podcast.
yeah. I think that was right after that, yeah.
Right. The 17 assists. And, you can say this is against, IUPU who, but, the fact that the matter of you set that record without your leading scorer on the team, it says a lot about what this team is capable of offensively. And, Cam Christie's another one where, he's leading all Big Ten freshmen in scoring. Mike Mitchell, you already talked about him. I think he's got 5 straight double-figure games, and he's led them in scoring the last 2 games, shooting a very high percentage from 3 during that stretch. So I think this is a team that has a lot of options outside of Dawson. I think that they've played up-tempo more than they have in a long time. Maybe, I think probably early in Richard Pitino's tenure is the last time I've seen them play this fast-paced. And, with that comes a lot of turnovers, which they had earlier in the year, but they've cut a lot down on those turnovers. A large part is the decision-making improvement of Hawkins. I believe that during the last 4 games, he has 58 assists with only 7 turnovers.
Wow, that's great.
And what that comes out to is about 11 assists per game with only 2 turnovers per game. And in that 17 assist game, he only had 1 turnover. So,
right.
When you have a guy that is dishing the ball at that high a level without the mistakes, that's going to just create so many opportunities for your offense and for different players. That, if this translates into the Big Ten, even half of what he's doing against lesser competition, this is going to be a much improved team from last year. I think the biggest question mark would be how this team, incorporates Dawson back into the fold with the way they were playing without him, relying more on the backcourt. Do they stand around and try to get the ball inside to Dawson? Because I don't think that's the formula for winning at a consistent level in the Big Ten. And case in point would be the loss they had at Ohio State, where Dawson had, his career high 36 points, 28 in the second half, and they were down 22 points at one point. Did make it a close game in the second half, but they still lost at Ohio State.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, and they're going to get tested in ways that they haven't been consistently tested yet. This Michigan game is an interesting opportunity, I think, because Michigan, it's a name brand program, obviously, but a team that's 6-7, like you said, they're coming off a recent loss to McNeese State, which is one of those non-Power 5 teams. Now, probably a better one than a lot of the teams the Gophers have faced this year, but still a fairly
10-win team.
A vulnerable Michigan team, though, to a certain degree, like not a bottom of conference team, but a game where you look at it and you say, okay, this isn't the Gophers going into play a national title contender or a bona fide expected to win the Big Ten kind of team. This is a Gopher team coming in with at least an opportunity, and I'm really curious to see kind of where we're not going to define the season by this one game, but I'm curious to see what we see from them in this game.
Yeah, I mean, if you're saying like what is a successful season, right? Coming off 9 wins last year, what does a successful season look like? Well, when you say that this team is deeper, that's more talented, and then you're expecting them to double last year's wins, then you lose to Missouri, San Francisco, and Ohio State. Missouri and San Francisco, those are games you maybe expect to win for a Big Ten team. That Ohio State game, was a game where they won last year, and but this is a better Ohio State team. So now you continue to say, okay, what is this team? What's the ceiling for this team? We're not talking about NCAA tournament. Maybe we're not even talking about postseason yet, but can they finish with a winning record this year? Right now they're 10-3. They have to win some of these games that you're capable of winning or you're supposed to win. I wouldn't say supposed to win. Like you said, the teams like Michigan that are vulnerable, this is a game that if you want to finish with a winning record this year, not maybe necessarily in Big Ten play, but overall, which would be a big improvement from last year, you need to win on the road at least, once or twice in conference season. And this is a game that they'll circle as, okay, we have a chance to win this game. They 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Ben Johnson's first Big Ten win was at Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a real surprise. At that point, this is your first year, and he's got a roster that's completely overhauled. And they beat Michigan, probably a better Michigan team than the one here. But that really made people think differently about what that team could accomplish. Now, they ended up finishing pretty poorly in the rest of the conference season. But I think you have to have one of those wins where, okay, this is something that we can, put on our resume and say, okay, this is the ceiling for our team. And, Michigan 6-7, but, they haven't won many times in Ann Arbor, the first time since 2011 when they won there a few years ago. And I think that would go a long way to adding to their resume. And you turn around and you play a Maryland team at home on Sunday,
right,
who is also vulnerable. So if you're saying that, this is a team that won 9 games last year, and then if you win these 2 games and you're 3-1 to start Big Ten play, I think that will go a long way to change the perception about Ben Johnson's program right now.
Absolutely. But that said, I mean, the Big Ten is a jump in competition by, a couple notches, I would think, in most cases. What to you is the difference between, aside from just the caliber of recruits, but whether it's style of play, whether it's just overall kind of number of good players, what stands out to you when you see a Big Ten team versus a lot of these teams the Gophers have been playing, and can, along with that, what will be the challenges the Gophers now face going against better competition in the Big Ten?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at box scores and you say, oh, this team lost to like a mid-major team, it's not always just about talent. It's not always about size and athleticism. And that's what you're going to see when you play against high major competition. When you have transfers like an Elijah Hawkins and Mike Mitchell, who came from the mid-major level.
Yeah.
Mike Mitchell is 6'2", 180 pounds. And he's going to be playing against a guard that's 3 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier in the Big Ten and at the high major level. Elijah Hawkins is 5'11", maybe a little bit under that, and he's 160 pounds. Well, there's going to be guards 3, 4, 5 inches taller than him at the high major level and better athletes. So the size difference is the biggest challenge that I think the guards are going to, be a challenge more than anybody. And you saw that when they played Ohio State, when they played even San Francisco, it was a much bigger backcourt than you'll see for most mid-major teams. And then when they played Missouri, and then that poses a challenge defensively. Now the Gophers are getting Braden Carrington back from his leave of absence for mental health. I know we talked a little bit about that the last time on the podcast, but he's a guard that's a little bit bigger. Weight wise, he's a little taller, and he's one of their, if not their best defender. That will help them in the Big Ten. But we're going to have to see a lot more growth across the board, from guys that have already played last year, like a Pharrell Payne, Joshua Joseph, Dawson, and Carrington, from the way that they competed in the Big Ten last year.
From a talent standpoint, it sure seems like Cam Christie is a bit of an X factor. He's been good so far this year. Seems like he's ascending at the right time, kind of getting better as his freshman season goes along. What's the ceiling on his freshman season, do you think?
Well, I mean, if I told you coming into the season that he was going to lead all Big Ten freshmen in scoring, you'd say, oh, that's a pretty high ceiling right there. That's
sure
probably better than I expected. But you have to take that in context. A lot of the higher profile freshmen in the Big Ten this year just have not been performing to their level of expectation. And so he's been a big surprise because, maybe he didn't think he was going to average double figures or, close to 12 points a game through non-conference play. But he's had some really big games. And then he's been relied on more with Braden Carrington out, with Dawson Garcia out. They've given him more playing time, more shots, and his confidence has really, I would say, probably improved, with his role on the team. I don't think he's taken a back seat to anyone, even though that Mike Mitchell and Elijah Hawkins are, I would say, a lot more experienced. Now, Cam, I think, has the highest ceiling, and I think many would agree, of any guard on this team, maybe any player on this team, because of his pedigree. His brother's in the NBA playing with the Lakers, and he's already taller than his brother, and his shot, I mean, his 3-point shooting is just as talented as Max Christie's his brother was when he was at Michigan State as a freshman. I think the biggest adjustment for him will be, now that he's in Big Ten play, how does he impact the game on more than just shooting the three? How does he impact the game at the basket? Can he finish at the basket? Can he penetrate? Can he hold his own defensively? Is one area where they're asking a lot more from him, because as his minutes increase and his role increases, he's going to be put in these situations where, if you don't defend, if you're not getting to the basket when they take away your outside shot, he can't afford to vanish because they need him. And it'll start tonight versus Michigan.
Last thing on that, and then maybe a final thought on the Big Ten. But, we've fixated so much, I did at least, and a lot of people did, on Dennis Evans and that whole saga last year, and Cam Christie.
Oh, are we still talking about Dennis Evans?
No, I'm just using it in context to talk about Cam Christie. Sure. And maybe how was that an underrated recruiting coup for Ben Johnson to get a player like that? His brother played at Michigan State, who probably had some pretty good offers, who's a 4-star. Like, how did Ben Johnson get him? And did we not properly value that at the time because we were a little bit too worried about losing Dennis Evans?
Well, first of all, they made it pretty clear that Cam Christie was the number one target in that 2023 class pretty early. A lot of people were, talking about them recruiting Dennis Evans. Yeah. But, he was in California. Not a lot of people have seen him. Their rankings that had him from, being in the top 20 to being low top 100 below Cam Christie. So I don't think people realize how good of a recruit Dennis Evans was until they really had a shot at him. He visited and then he committed. But Christie's always been there. I mean, we've been talking a lot about Christie since the summer when the Gophers were really recruiting him more than anyone in that class, definitely more than anyone in Minnesota. And, we're talking about Tayson Chapman, who's going to Ohio State. They really stopped recruiting him because they knew that Cam Christie, they had a shot at him. And he was very, very highly thought of in Illinois. I mean, he didn't win Mr. Basketball. That went to, I believe, a Jeremy Fears that plays for Michigan State. But Christie was, a lot of people thought was the number one player in Illinois. Because of the history of his brother, at Michigan State and obviously NBA, everyone expected him to possibly make a huge impact on any team that he played for as a freshman. So, again, when you have a player like Cam, he could have easily gone to, any of the home state schools, Northwestern Illinois, but also he could have followed his brother to Michigan State. He didn't have any blue blood offers, but there are a lot of programs toward the end, like we've seen in football,
right?
Where, you got a guy committed and then you're saying, oh, do you really want to play for Minnesota?
Right.
But they couldn't pry him away because he was very committed to the Gophers, not only, that he wanted to help turn the program around from where they were last year, but, there's something to be said about a team that really, really wants you and needs you.
Yeah.
And, they put all their eggs in one basket when it was coming to recruiting Cam at, as far as the guards. I mean, they lost a lot of guards in the last 2 years. They ended up losing their starting point guard last year. And, before they landed anyone in the transfer portal, when I'm talking about Hawkins and Mitchell, they knew that they had their guard of the future in Cam Christie. And at one point, they were expecting him to possibly be their starting point guard. He didn't play a lot of point guard, all 4 years, but he did play more his senior year, trying to prepare, just in case if he was going to be the guy to have to lead this team in the backcourt. And I think it helps him to have two players that are capable of carrying the load in the backcourt as he develops.
Final thought, maybe Big Ten wide. We talked some about Michigan, obviously, already, and a little bit about Nebraska and some of these other teams. But how do you scope out the league strength wise so far from what we've seen in mostly non-conference play?
Pretty easy, Mike. It's Purdue and everyone else.
Yeah, that's what it seems like to me too.
Yeah, but it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was exactly like that last year. I think there were a few other teams at the top that, even though Purdue, pretty much ran away with the league title, they did lose some games, down the stretch in February and March, because I think, they probably were thinking, we're not really looking at, we're going to win this thing, but we're looking ahead to, number one seed and all of that. I think right now, Purdue, even though they lost to Northwestern, I don't see a team challenging them for the title. But after that, there's a big, huge drop off in who's the second best team in the league. Is it Ohio State? Is it Illinois? Michigan State still has the talent. Wisconsin has the depth, but obviously it's Wisconsin, and sometimes they play a style that really keeps them from. Has them barely beating a team in the lower portion of the Big Ten. So I think that there's a chance the Gophers could move up. Obviously not right behind Purdue, but there's a chance for them to move up quite a bit, because there are teams that they can beat that have really good records, that have good, quality wins, non-conference, that could, help them make a jump this year. Wisconsin beat Marquette. They beat Virginia. Illinois has got some good wins. They beat UCLA. We're seeing some teams that show potential to in their top 25. They've been there a couple times this year. But right now, I like Purdue. I think Illinois is really taking a step back with their ceiling, with Terrence. Terrence Shannon. He's dealing with some legal issues right now with an allegation. I think Minnesota will see where they fit in the Big Ten in the next couple weeks. They don't really have a strong schedule to start, but they're going to end up playing in the middle of this Big Ten season. They'll be playing quite a few teams that are right there behind Purdue.
Well, we should get a good measure of kind of what kind of tier of the Big Ten they slot into with some of these early games. Michigan Thursday night, home game against Maryland on Sunday. Marcus Fuller will be covering all of it as usual. Marcus, appreciate it as always. We'll talk soon, okay?
All right, appreciate it. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. Good stuff for Marcus. And like we said, it's a big kind of slate of back-to-back games here with at Michigan, home against Maryland. Win one, win two. That'd be greedy, I think. This Michigan game's still going to be hard. Maryland's not going to be an easy game, but, win one, win two, lose two feels a lot different. So I just feel like it's an important stretch. It's an important 2 games to kind of see where this team is at. I think people are kind of, cautiously saying, hey, it's a better team than it has been. I think we want to know how much better. I don't think we learned enough during the non-conference season to say definitively that this is going to be a better team, because the opponents were so collectively, below the standard that most teams are playing. So I want to see what this team has. I think we're going to learn a lot more, and information is always useful no matter what comes from it. Let's get to the cooler. I want to play you this Justin Jefferson quote from Wednesday's media session. He was asked again about kind of the off-season, the kind of Vikings decision-making on quarterbacks. It's a big off-season. Like I said, we talked about this a lot on Access Vikings on Wednesday. Go check out that podcast as well, please. But I want to play the full Jefferson quote to kind of let you hear it for yourself.
Just like I said before, it's not really under my control. All I can control is my play and what I do out there on the field. I'm confident in they're going to make the right decision up there to, bring whoever they need to bring in the building to throw us the ball next year. If it's Kirk, perfect. If it's whoever they choose, that's not my decision. So I'm always going to continue to just be myself regardless, and just, playing my best ball whenever I'm out there on the field.
Now listen, some of this could just be Jefferson saying it's not my decision. They're going to make the decision. I'm not going to try to insert myself into this decision because I'm a player. They're paid to make these decisions. That's kind of how it goes. But I thought his phrasing was interesting when he says basically, if it's Kirk Cousins, perfect. If it's somebody else, that's their decision. that tells me that he has a preference. He might not have a demand, but he has a preference. He likes Kirk Cousins as his quarterback. That bond has grown over the years. They've had a lot of success together as a throwing and catching tandem. He respects Kirk Cousins for what he brings, and he's probably a little bit nervous about what it would mean to play with a different quarterback. I think he just wants to see, I think at the end of the day, he wants to see this situation stabilized, and right now it's not stable, right? They've been going back and forth, bouncing around between all these different backups. They're going back to Nick Mullins for Sunday's finale against Detroit. Like, there's just a lot going on right now with the position that's got to be frustrating. But I think if you just take this for face value, I think Justin Jefferson has plainly laid out that his preference, that what he would like to see is the return of Kirk Cousins. Now, where it gets interesting is, what if the Vikings decide not to do that? Or what if Kirk Cousins and the Vikings can't agree at least on the terms of what that would look like? If Kirk Cousins just wants too much to stay here, if he wants kind of that one last decent-sized contract, and he's going to be 36 before next season starts, he's going to be coming off this Achilles injury. What if he decides that, I can't take like this kind of middle ground deal. I've got to have the one more deal at the end of my career, maybe go somewhere else that I think has a better window of winning. Maybe this just isn't the right combination to fit anymore. How does that then look to Jefferson when he's got a contract still to sign? He's got, numbers he wants to put up, individual goals, team goals. Starting over at quarterback would be, probably exciting to some degree if they got the right guy in, but could also be a decision that really takes the franchise in a different direction for better or worse. So that's a fascinating, interesting kind of subplot to this offseason. Not only what do the Vikings do at quarterback, but what does Justin Jefferson think about that decision? Couple more things. Gopher women's basketball lost to Maryland. They lost to Iowa a few days ago, kind of getting a lesson in Big Ten play, just like the Gophers men will right now. I still think that's a good team, but they've got some growing to do as well. So interested to see how they bounce back from that. I think the effort's there. They're young still. Be interested to see what happens from there. And Minnesota's PWHL team, the Minnesota team, beat Boston 3-2. They still don't have nicknames. I want to get into that with Rachel Blount on Friday's show. We're going to talk a lot more about this new the new league that Minnesota is playing in this year. The home opener is Saturday against Montreal. Just want to ask her a whole bunch of stuff about kind of where this league is at, how different this is from past incarnations of the league Minnesota's played in, things like that. So we'll get into that a whole lot more on Friday's show. But for now, know that they won their opener Wednesday in Boston, and that the home opener Saturday at XL Energy Center. All home games this year at XL Energy Center in the PWHL. That will do it for me today. Like I said, Rachel Blount coming up on Friday's show to talk about that. Until then, I'm Michael Rand. We'll see you again tomorrow.